Hi. This video is intended as a brief introduction to get you up to speed with Balsa Model Flight Simulator's building interface. When I first started a few weeks ago, I found it to be rather tough going at first, but after spending over a couple hundred hours creating a variety of strange flying devices, I feel like I've learnt enough of the toolset and its quirks to be able to comfortably make any kind of plane if I set my mind to it. I'll be building a plane from nothing to a mostly finished state. I don't necessarily recommend trying to follow along and do exactly what I'm doing. I'll just be demonstrating all the steps along the way to make a working plane, and a number of tips and tricks to make the most of the interface. Please keep in mind that I'm using the initial early access release version of the game, and many things are likely to change and be improved over time. Also, I'm assuming that you've already familiarized yourself with the basic flight controls and have set up the various axes for your input device. So let's begin. The plane I'll be building for this video is the Miles M39B Libellula, a pretty interesting looking aircraft. When attempting to build a replica, it's always good to have reference images handy. For this I'm going to use a program called On-Top Replica, which will allow me to have the images overlaid onto the game. Here it is. Right click on it to select a window. Then you can change the opacity to what you like. Once you have it positioned, you will want to go to Advanced, and then Enable Click-Through. And if you want to adjust the on-top replica window again, just Alt-Tab to it. Before we do anything here, it's a good idea to make a new save, and I recommend incrementing the save as you go in case you mess something up and don't realise. The camera controls are quite simple. Hold right-click to rotate around, and middle mouse button will move the centre of rotation, and scroll to zoom of course. This game also has good head tracking support, though I'll keep mine disabled for now. The first part we'll place is the cockpit, and this one seems to be the closest match for now. If you want to delete something, just drop it to the left here, or press delete. The first part you place is the root of the craft, and each subsequent part is the root of the part connected to it. So any translation or rotation to a part will affect everything connected to it. Now for the fuselage. It's not especially clear from these thumbnails, but each of these is designed to fit a particular profile. There's type A, B, M, and N. And if you click the top left here, you can arrange these parts by these types to make finding the right bits easier. To smoothly join different types together, you can use these adaptive fuselage pieces, which will morph to fit either end. To make the nose, I'll use a combination of adaptive fuselage and the small cone here. If you mouse over the adaptive part, you will see these coloured handles, which you can use to change the length, tilt, and slant to get it looking just right. You can also right-click and adjust the parameters there. And if you click and move your mouse away from the radial, it's easier to get it on an exact percentage. Now that's done, I'll add the remaining main fuselage parts. It seems to continue straight for a bit, so one adaptive fuselage, and another after it for the transition to the tapered end. WASD and Q and E will rotate apart, and the rotation is always relative to the forward direction of the build, indicated by this arrow over here. I'll press A twice to get this cone facing the right way before snapping it into position. This seems about right. Now let's get the front wings on. Again, it's not super clear from these thumbnails, but these are all quite different in size and adjustability. This is the single control surface piece that is used to make your ailerons, elevators, flaps and rudders, and the rest are typical static wing surfaces. The AF1 is the best to use here, because it can go very thin. Now, you'll notice a few problems here. Firstly, this clearly isn't the right angle, which I can solve by pressing the spacebar, which will straighten it out. I'll also press C to go to manual rotation mode, which will make positioning it easier here. To rotate the wings so the profile is going the right way to the airflow, press W twice, and I'll place them right there. Just like the adaptive fuselage, wing surfaces have these little handles when you mouse over them. So I'll adjust the chord, span, horizontal taper, sweep and thickness to get it looking just about right. I need to fine tune its position, so I'll press 2 to go to offset mode, and just drag these arrows until it's at the right spot. Pressing 1 through 6 will switch between the various modes, and most of the time I recommend staying in offset mode, so if you click something, you don't accidentally pick something up, which is easy to do in place mode. If you do this by accident, it's best just to click again, and just Ctrl Z, or click up here to undo. Next, to add these rounded tips, I'll add another AF1 piece to the end, and make adjustments like I did before, this time tweaking the curve 2 to get a somewhat rounded look. Now when placing the control surface, it's a good idea to press C again to switch the part rotation mode back to automatic, and pressing space should align it correctly onto a swept wing. Again, I'll make adjustments so it looks about right. Ideally it could go smaller, but this will have to do. I want to set it a little deeper into the wing, so I'm going to use the offset tool to move it slightly. If you hold R and click on a part in the place mode, it will make a copy which you can place elsewhere, and I'll just use this to finish the front wings. That's okay for now. Next I'll place the main wings. Because these are relatively large, the AF3 will be fine here. Again, I'm pressing C to go back to the manual rotation mode. More adjustments just like before. And I'm keeping in mind I'll be adding control surfaces soon, which will increase the overall chord. It's a good idea not to obsess over exact placement and details in the early stages. You can easily tweak proportions later on. I need to angle these wings up a bit, so I'll switch to rotate mode by pressing 3 and click on the wing. I can either click on the blue circle here to adjust it with the mouse, or use the keyboard and press Q and D holding Shift to make small adjustments. This looks about right actually, but often you will want to disable the coarse angle snapping by pressing Z, which will allow you to set it to a more precise angle with the mouse. Now for the small fins and rudders on the wingtips. I'll use another AF1, pressing spacebar to align it and rotating it upright with Q. When we look from the front, I can see that it's somewhat tilted. So to fix that, I go into rotation mode, click the part, then press F, which switches between the local and world coordinate frames when rotating or offsetting. Because I attached and aligned it to this angled wing, the local frame is also at this angle, and by switching back and forth between local and world, I can see how far off it is from vertical. So I'll just keep tweaking the local until it matches the world frame. Local and world frames also apply when using the offset tool. Now I'll shape these fins like I did previously. Rotating the view around the part will help you find the right handle for the dimension you want to adjust. I'll use 2 of these pieces to make up the fins, holding R when in place mode and clicking to make a copy, rotating with Q or E, then attaching it to the main wing just below the other one. Because I didn't press space before placing it on the wing, the rotation is vertical to the world, so I don't need to fix that. but if it was at an angle, I would just use the same trick as before, switching back and forth with F. Now the rudder surfaces. Because we're currently limited in the adjustability of control surfaces, I'll have to improvise to try and get a roughly curved edge here. It might well be that a simple square rudder would look nicer, but I'll try this anyway just to demonstrate how you can do it. I'm using a combination of skew, sweep, and a horizontal taper to get an additional couple of angles here. And I'll use 3 control surface pieces to make up a best approximation of the rudder. Looks pretty rough up close, but from a distance it's not too awful. Now the tail fin. For this I'll use an AF-M0 instead of an AF1, because I don't need it to go that small, and there's no curves involved. Also, this wing type has a symmetrical profile, which is good for vertical tail sections. Keep this in mind if you try to place an AF1, which has an asymmetrical profile, on top of an AF-M0, because you won't be able to line them up with each other exactly. Now for the engine fairings. This cone looks good for the rear sections. I'll just build them on top of the wings for now. I can move them under later. An adaptive fuselage to link this cone to the T105 fairing. There we go. I'll shorten the adaptive section to look about right. You may notice that the mirrored section over there looks different. This is a small bug that will be fixed eventually. Keep in mind this is still early access. To fix this, all I have to do is pick up the good one and place it down again on the wing, and now the opposing section is correct. The real plane uses 2 bladed props, but on balance I think I prefer to use the 3 blade here because of the pointy cones. And I'll move the engines down to where they need to be. Now for the ailerons and flaps on the rear wing, I'll want to return to automatic rotation with C. Make sure it's lined up right by pressing space. That's great. And these are the flaps. I'll tweak the horizontal taper of all of these to look about right. It's not clear to me from the pictures how these rudders don't interfere with the ailerons, so I'll just use the skew to keep them from clipping for now. It won't make any difference to the game if things are clipping like that, but it'll bother me. Now that I have all the surfaces in place, I'll go around and assign the actuate axes correctly. Thankfully, we have this detailed paper about the libellular planes that has this very useful diagram of all the control surfaces on the M39B. So I'm going through them now, making sure roll and pitch are set correctly. Keep in mind that because these elevators are at the front of the plane, they need to be at a positive percentage to push the nose of the plane up or down accordingly. If it was a tail elevator on a more traditional plane layout, you would want them to go the opposite way. For the flaps, I'm going to set them to be controlled with a channel A axis. Keep in mind that there's a small bug currently, where unlike roll, pitch and yaw, where you can see your controls live in the workshop, the other axes don't currently move until you go outside and test there. Now there is a small issue with assigning roll surfaces that isn't directly relevant here, but I should mention it anyway for other builds. Say if for some reason that I wanted these to be front ailerons. I would just right click, add roll access to the actuator, and it should work, right? But as you can see, both surfaces are moving in the same direction, which isn't what you want for roll. This happens because when you place a control surface, it automatically assigns axes based on where it is relative to the plane. Symmetrically placed surfaces near the tips of wings will usually be set to roll by default, and each side should be the opposite of each other. But if you place them near the centre of the craft, they usually get set to pitch, and rolling isn't reversed. Anyway, the best way around this for now would be to just pick up the part, press X to disable symmetry, and place it back down. Then make a copy of it, move to the other side, and rotate it to match. Now you can individually set the roll to have the effect you want. Okay, back to the plane. Let's get some motors in there. Press V to switch to the internal view, and it looks like the large electric motors will just about fit. Before I place them, I'll hit X to have a mirror copy on the other side. Some components will default to a single part being placed at a time. Exact placement doesn't matter, so right there will be fine. Now I need a battery. A couple of small batteries should fit nicely here. I'll switch to manual rotation with C, and enable symmetry to make 2. Pressing 4 will take me to the connect mode, and by default everything should be automatically connected. If I need to, I can connect things manually by click dragging from these circles, and a right click on these grey squares will delete the connection. The exact configuration generally won't matter, but you can do things like connect multiple motors to a single propeller for more thrust. If you wanted to change which axis the motor responds to, or limit the RPM, just right click on them. And you can right click on the propellers too, to change them to pusher props if they're pointing backwards, and to set them to be contra-rotating. You often want one prop set to turn the other way to prevent torque steer, which will cause the plane to constantly roll. I'll do that for the left one now. Now I'll add a chair and a pilot, which will allow me to fly the thing from a first-person perspective. You can right-click on the seat and click this to get a preview. Now for some guns. The real plane had 2 20mm cannons mounted in the roots of these forward wings. But you can see that the big cannons we have right now are much too large to sit nicely in the frame, so I'll use a smaller cannon instead. Because there's not a nice way to have the barrels sticking out, I'll just fully hide them inside the nose. The shots will pass through without issue. If you want to rotate a weapon, just right-click on it and disable auto-align. You can also set the weapon group there. I'll need a sight for the gun, so I'll add that now too. Using the first-person preview will help with fine-tuning its position. I'll add some landing gear. There's only a couple of retractable options currently, so I'll stick to fixed for now. If I right-click on the front wheel and add some steering angle, that will give me some control on the ground. Now is a good time to enable the centre of mass, centre of thrust, and aero stability overlays. If you don't see the little green centre of lift marker, then click on the settings wheel up here and enable it. I won't go into full detail of how best to use the aero stability tool. For now, I'll just set the simulated airspeed to 90. It seems to be quite stable, but I'll have more manoeuvrability if I move the weight back a bit, closer to but still in front of the centre of lift. Okay, let's take it for a spin. Seems to fly very nicely. The flaps probably need some tweaks, but it's generally quite controllable. At this point, before further tweaks, I might want to get the overall proportions as close to the real thing as possible, and the on-top replica window is very useful for that. Now onto the paint mode, which you access by pressing 5. This should all be fairly self-explanatory. I'll use the depth opacity handle here to prevent the yellow from reaching too high. Onto the decals, which you get to by pressing 6. The Decals Editor is quite complex. and aspects of the UI are likely to change in the future, so I won't go into too much detail in this video. For now, I'll just cover the basics. When placing a decal, you can use Shift plus the scroll wheel to rotate, Control plus scroll wheel to alter the size, and Alt plus scroll wheel will change the opacity. Pressing T will cycle through the clipping modes, allowing you to choose between placing a decal on just one part or across several. After you've placed a decal, you can click on the little widget here to continue to make adjustments. All the Control, Alt, Shift, scroll wheel controls are still available. You can move the decal around with these outer handles. These handles allow you to alter the angle of projection of the decal onto the surface. And this handle just moves the widget itself, which is handy if you have a lot of these near each other and you want to move some out of the way. If you select a decal widget, then deselect it, the next decal you place will have the same attributes. Layers are built up one after the other, so consider that when trying to create complex paint schemes. By the way, you can turn on the workshop lights when not in paint or decal mode by pressing Alt plus L, which may help you when trying to accurately gauge the colours. With some creativity and a lot of patience, you can make some really superb looking paint schemes with this tool. So there we are. One finished Miles M39B Libellula. There's always more you can do, of course. I no doubt I'll be tweaking this some more to get it just right. I'll include the Steam Workshop link to this plane in the description below, if you'd like to play with it yourself. I wouldn't recommend trying such a complex replica for your first build. It's much better to build something original first, so you're free to experiment and learn the basics. If there are any particular Balsa Model Flight Simulator related topics you would like me to cover, or if you have any tips or things I missed here about the editor, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks.